You know this music is on Tim Wilken's iPad, his iPod, maybe in his car. We'll funk it up. Time for the MLB Baseball Scout podcast with former scouting director Tim Wilken. I'm Mick Gillispie, and it's great to have all you guys with us. Make sure that you do us a favor and join on YouTube. It's at Cubs Baseball Channel. That's where you find us, and then anywhere that you get a podcast, and I know a lot of you guys do that as well. You just go to Apple or Spotify or wherever we're on there as well. So, what's up, Tim? How you doing, man?
Doing great. Trying to dodge these rainstorms down here, but everything's good and got good pace to it. So, how are you doing?
Yeah, you're in Dunedin, Florida. You got the gopher tortoises outside, and you got the weather out there. And I'm great. Look, I'm great up here in East Tennessee, home of the Cubs AA affiliate, Tennessee Smokies, watching a lot of baseball and kind of in the mid-swing. It's hard to believe that we're already in June.
Third of the way through already.
Yeah, goes by fast.
Yeah, it sure does.
That's what makes it fun. The good seasons. Ryan Sandberg told me that the more fun you're having, the faster the year goes by. So if it's going slow, that means that you're not having a lot of fun. All right, well, let's talk about one of the Cubs' top prospects. I want to get your perspective on a guy, Jordan Wicks. He's a left-handed pitcher, and I think this guy's got it, man. I mean, I don't know what he's going to do in the big leagues, but I think he's going to be there. He's a starter. He throws innings. He's susceptible to a home run a little bit, but he's still kind of learning this level of baseball, former first-round pick. And you can see everything kind of coming together for him. What do you remember about Jordan Wicks?
Well, I know he's a first-round pick out of Kansas State. From what I can put together, and I did not get to see him as an amateur, I know he's first-round pick for the Cubs, and a lot of people kind of liking him, not as much physically, but his pitching rapport to Logan Allen, the rookie with the Cleveland Indians, who's had a pretty good year to start with, and stuff seems to be similar. Both of them have real good feel for pitching. They say the separator between Wicks and Allen is Wicks might have actually a better breaking ball. He probably throws 92 to 90 to 95 and averages 92 to 93. He's got a curveball, and I guess he's added a cutter that has kind of escalated his ascent up the Cubs system, and everyone talks about his deception and his feel for pitching, which goes along with 3 or 4 average pitches. That's a pretty good combo there. And there's a pitcher, left-handed pitcher with the Arizona Diamondbacks that threw 7 shutout innings the other day named Tommy Henry out of the University of Michigan. He sounds somewhat similar to Wicks, and it sounds like Wicks has got a chance to move pretty quick through the Cubs system, and I like the sounds of that he can repeat his delivery, and hence he throws quite a few strikes.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. Also, the changeup. He's got a really good changeup, which I think is an important pitch. I think if your changeup's your best pitch, which it is for him, you're going to have success no matter where you go, right? So he's got a great changeup, and he repeats his delivery. The other thing that he does well, to me, Tim, is that he disguises the ball coming out of his hands just by the way that he moves his body, and it's hard to pick up sometimes.
2 or 3 people I've talked with, that was the big thing. They talked about that deception that you were alluding to, and that bodes well. I mean, naturally, it's going to be tougher as he goes up through AAA if they decide to do that, or bring him straight to the major leagues. So it looks like the sky's the limit for him, and I just like the way he sounds, uh, and people talking about his ability to use all those pitches and his feel for pitching. So,
well, we'll keep an eye on him. I'll be broadcasting his games as long as he's in Double-A, and then I think that a move for him will probably happen before the end of the season. But yeah, the deception, and he's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's left-handed, and he's got the great changeup. So that's Jordan Wicks. Tim, I wanted to ask you this. I see scouts that come into the ballpark. They want to watch batting practice. They want to get here early. What are you guys doing? When you show up and you're early and you're like, there's like 5 guys in the stands. What exactly is a baseball scout doing so early? What are you looking for?
I'd say for the most part, from my viewpoint, is watching them take ground balls off the bat, either from the fungo hitters or from the guys hitting and batting practice. It's you can use it to your advantage to see how they break, how they use their feet, especially the infielders, and it also, I love to see batting practice and guys taking balls off the bat. I can kind of tell you there's 3 outfielders that I'd seen as amateurs, and basically I had my storyline defensively just because of the way they took balls off the bat during batting practice. And sometimes you go to high school games, you may not see one ball hit to that center fielder, or you get very few chances with infielders. But there was 3 outfielders that I've seen that really worked on their craft defensively during batting practice, and it really helped. Probably the best one I've ever seen doing that was Jackie Bradley Jr. He took it so serious and probably shagged 2 out of the 3 groups. And you could see why he was a top-line center fielder defensively. Albert Almora was very similar out of high school, worked it very hard, and a potential 1-1 pick, Dylan Cruz out of LSU, when he was in high school. I got to see everything I wanted during BP defensively, other than setting up to throw a runner out. He did not get any chances that night, but I left the ballpark very happy knowing that I could depict his defensive abilities just because of the way he went about it and worked his craft. In fact, I went over to his parents before the game and I said, please thank Dylan for what he does in batting practice, taking balls off the bat, because it really helps, and it was very enjoyable to watch. And I wanted him to know that, and his parents, that things like this do not go unnoticed.
Yeah, look, I remember watching Dwayne Wise, same way, during batting practice. You didn't get in his area. And then one of the best ever was Sam Fold, watching Sam Fold during batting practice, who's now, I guess, the GM of the Phillies, right, which is pretty crazy. We used to call him Sammy Baseball, but he would get out in center field, and he would wait for the ball to hit the bat and then run to where he thought the ball was going to land without looking. And that was something that he was able to do to perfection in games. People would wonder how he was so good defensively, and I think a lot of that was developed during batting practice.
Yes, and they can work on different techniques like drop step, crossover, and just picking the ball off the batted ball. The way their first step goes in reacting to it, they can kind of gauge the swing a little bit better than the untrained outfielder or center fielder. It's really fun to watch. And then if you can see it in the game, it even adds to the evaluation part. And that was, I did. I remember, Sam, I went over to the Cubs in 2006, and you could see he was extremely diligent. Had the pleasure. We had drafted Dwayne Wise when I was with Toronto. And boy, he was a very good defender, and he did work his craft very good.
Hanging out with Tim Wilken. I'm Mick Gillispie, hanging with you guys as well, the MLB Baseball Scout podcast. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up wherever you might be hanging out with us today. You know, as we talk about the art of scouting with former scouting director Tim Wilken. Tim, the college baseball tournament is underway, the NCAA tournament, and all but 2 of the regionals were in the Deep South. The SEC had a bunch of them. The ACC had some, but there was only one that was west of the Rockies. And I feel like this is something that we should talk about. It feels like there's a decline in baseball out west, at least in college.
And seemingly it's been going that way for the last 7 to 10 years. And it's, you know, I think it needs to be tabled around. I don't know if it's because players or potential players are opting for other sports. Maybe the allure of it is, you know, starting to decline for various reasons, and it's a little bit of an eye-opener. We can go all the way back to 2016, and that year the PAC conference had the University of Utah had won the conference with a sub 500 record, and there were no regionals west of the Rocky Mountains. And you alluded to it earlier. I think there was 8 SEC clubs that are regional hosts, and you've also got schools like Coastal Carolina, who is a national champion, and they have a regional also. So there's many regionals in the Deep South, and hopefully that decline doesn't start coming towards the east. But something really, I don't know if there's an answer for it, but someone needs to start paying attention to it, because it's obvious where the talent has been in the last 10 years. And hopefully someone has an answer for that, and the West can start an incline instead of what's happening right now.
Yeah, you got Stanford in California.
Yeah.
And you got Stillwater, Oklahoma State. And then you got Indiana State, and that's it. I mean, every other one's Auburn, Baton Rouge, Charlottesville, Virginia, Clemson, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. You mentioned Coastal Carolina and Conway, Miami.
Wake Forest.
Yeah, right. Fayetteville and Gainesville and Kentucky, Lexington. I mean, you go through it, it's crazy to think that, I mean, you're outside of those 3 places. The rest of them are in the South. Do you think that part of that is NIL too? The fact that name, image, and likeness is now going to pay college players extra, and the teams in the South are going to be able to develop more NIL money for their players than the teams out West? I mean, could that be part of it?
And I guess it could be. Maybe it's also a byproduct of the football programs. And you can see there's a decided advantage in the Deep South as well as far as football goes. And yeah, you could be on to something. I'm not super familiar with the NIL, but it does sound like it's having quite the effect on schools in the Southeast for sure.
One of the things that you and I have talked about on the phone a couple of times that I wanted to ask you about was you'll watch games now that that you're at home and you're not scouting every day, and you've noticed that catchers and umpires are leaving baseball bats near home plate. Like they used to, it was a courtesy thing. You just threw the bat out of the way if the guy left it. And you said, and I haven't seen this, but I wanted to talk to you about it because you've mentioned it to me a few times, that they'll be in the middle of a play and there's a baseball bat laying right in front of home plate that nobody moved.
It's amazing. Within the course of about a 10-day period, I've seen it come into play on at least 3 different times where either the runner slide was diverted because of the bat being around. That happened twice. Then there was a throw from the outfield that was right on target, and the bat is approximately 3 to 5 feet in front of the plate, and the ball hits the bat and caroms off, and the runner scores easily. But also, I think there has to be an awareness. And we've got some pretty high-profile big stars in the major leagues, and we've had 2 that have had injuries, not necessarily because of the bat at home plate, but where if they have to redirect that slide, we're talking about possible serious injuries. We saw it in O'Neill Cruz when he tried to change his slide, and he's been out for at least a month and a half, and it looks like it's going to be quite a while. Even Aaron Judge, when he had the injury, he was kind of redirecting his slide. This was at third base, but bigger guys, it's a little tougher to redirect their slide. And once you're already in that process of sliding, you don't want to be changing. There might be serious injury. And it kind of used to be a thing where you saw umpires would kick the bat out of the way, or catchers would get it out of the way, or the guy running from on deck, it used to be his responsibility to go up there and grab that bat and get it out of the play. But for some reason, it's happening, and you see it once or twice, and you say, okay. But 3 times in 10 days, and you just wonder how much from amateur ball to professional ball, how much is being talked about that this is something that I've always taken for granted. That bat was never around the plate, and I don't know if umpires have been told not to kick the bat out of the area, that you need to be in the right position to make the call. But there's going to be, if this continues, I'm sure there's going to be quite the injury, and maybe to a superstar, and someone needs to get that bat out of the way.
He's Tim Wilken, former Cubs scouting director, and a guy that spent many years between the Blue Jays, the Cubs, Tampa Bay, and Arizona in baseball. Mick Gillispie, great to have you guys. This is the MLB Baseball Scout Podcast. We talk all things scouting and baseball, some of Tim's stories, different guys that he's helped draft and scout, and then, just different topics in the game of baseball. And we both love the game. And Tim, something that's kind of taken over baseball at the youth level is travel baseball. And it's a lot different than when I was a kid. If you played on the high school team, and in my day, that was a big deal. If you played on the Legion team, that was a big deal. If you played rec ball, that was cool. And these days, it's travel ball. I've got a godson who's a great baseball player in the Mid-Atlantic, and his high school team is a lot less important than his travel team, which is crazy to think. As a sophomore, he's one of the aces of the staffs, of the baseball pitching staff, and on the high school team, they don't care. It's all about travel ball right now.
Yeah, and seemingly from a fair amount of the people that I've talked with, and I've not seen a lot of travel baseball, but I know it's got a big jet behind it, and some of the complaints from players, parents, guys that are in professional baseball now is that in a lot of cases, these kids are playing a lot of games and there's very little practice or talk of baseball. And I don't know if it's coming from the sponsors of these travel teams or what about the pressure to win. So working on your baseball skills, talking about the game of baseball is kind of being thrown out the window, seemingly, from what I've heard from people, that there's a lot less practice and talking about the nuances of baseball. And so a lot of this stuff is kind of bypassed, seemingly. And I think you're kind of seeing it on the professional level, most certainly in the amateur, that it doesn't seem like a lot of these players, they're maybe as skilled or more skilled than players from 15, 20 years ago. But there's a lot of times you'll see different parts of the game, just like with the bad incidents of the last 10 days, that not getting that bat out of the way. I'm not sure that's ever talked about at the amateur level. It could be in some places, but for this to be happening and other things that you see in the game and say, well, people used to work on that and now they're not. And you're wondering about, have you curbed the ability for instincts to come into play and take in, along with those instincts, to take in how to implement that in the game as a player.
How do you scout these travel teams, and what age are teams showing up and watching, these tournaments that teams play in all across the country in travel ball?
Well, like I said, I haven't seen a lot of it, but I'll see it on Twitter and Facebook a fair amount, that you've got travel teams between 6 and 8 years old, and all the way up to 18, and that's a lot of baseball for kids, and maybe this is one of the reasons why you're starting to see a little bit of demise in the amateur side of baseball, because they're playing a lot of baseball, but they're not learning a lot of baseball. And with all these games, and it's bunched up naturally in a short time period, it might be a five-day tournament, and I'm hearing teams playing anywhere from 7 to 10 games. So baseball needs to be taught at a younger level, and maybe not as much playing of games, but I don't know if that's going to bode well for people supporting those clubs financially. And like I said, there's always that push to try to win games. And so some of this stuff has been passed by as a result.
Yeah, look, my feelings on it are this. I mean, I couldn't have afforded, didn't have money coming up. You know, my parents didn't have money to do any of this. I wouldn't have been able to play on any travel baseball, even if it was something that was going on back when I was playing. They would have priced me out of the game, and all the kids that lived in some of the places that I lived. None of us would have been able to afford to play. And that's what I think I'm seeing at the professional level are a very upper crust group of players that are coming from America, and then some of the people that are playing, the players from other countries, I feel like my upbringing probably matches their upbringing a lot more, from Venezuela, probably not Dominican, just because their poverty's so bad there. But, you know, Venezuela and some of the other places, I have a lot in common with them because, you know, it's like you played, but you're not extremely wealthy. And I feel like the American kids are from, you know, middle to upper middle to rich classes, and that people like me that didn't have a lot of money didn't play. We couldn't afford it.
And some of the prices that I hear that the players have to pay just to be on that travel team are pretty steep, and sometimes you wonder how the monies can be taken care of for some of these players. And we're not talking from low middle class on down, unless there's someone that has been brought to their attention that they can, so to say, give that player a scholarship to that club. I think it's becoming increasingly harder for players that don't have that kind of money, and maybe they have to opt to other sports, and that's why we're starting to lose more and more players in North America.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. I think that, and until this year with the pitch clock, the game just was kind of lagging and long, and you know, and it didn't have as much action as football and basketball and, you know, hockey, which, you know, to me is more of a Canadian sport. But basketball and football, which I feel like, you know, baseball competes with, and now soccer, which people really love soccer. You know, I have a son, and he's 11, and we're kicking the soccer ball around, which is something I never did as a kid. Never kicked a soccer ball. I threw a baseball or a football, you know. And when I look at the game of baseball, I feel like the biggest difference in the game because of travel ball is how good the pitching is compared to how it was back, you know, when I was playing. And I think that pitching now, that the pitching itself, you're showing kids how to throw, how to maximize their velocity, how to throw different pitches at such a young age, that it's become a pitching dominant sport. And the batting averages are lower. There's a ton more strikeouts. The ball's not in play as much anymore. And to me, Tim, I feel like they either need to lower the mound or they need to move it back a little bit, just because, you know, watching, you know, 10 to 15 strikeouts a night isn't good for the game. It's not fun to watch. But I don't know. I mean, that's just my thought. I feel like that's probably the next direction that things go, and I feel like it's travel ball because all of these pitchers are so much better at the craft just because they've learned at a young age how to throw hard, how to manipulate the baseball. And the pitching from the big leagues down is so much ahead of the hitting these days. Your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a kind of hard one to get in. It's really tough one for me because now our starting pitchers are anywhere from 5 to 7 innings a game, and the relievers some of the relievers that are being ran out there. I mean, say if you have a 7 or 8 man relief staff. The velocities are so much higher than they were 10, 15 years ago. I think the relief part of the game has really escalated it, and naturally you're going to get a fair amount of strikeouts. You're getting guys thrown all the way up to 104 miles an hour this year, and that's just, it's causing more strikeouts. And like you said, batting averages have been going down, and we see a lot of people on TV applauding some guys that are hitting 220, and you're saying to yourself, boy, 220.
Now, you wouldn't even got on the field back in the 80s with 220.
No chance. And sometimes there's a lot of situations in baseball, and there's a school of thought out there that striking out is not that bad. And that kind of irks me to some degree, because if you got runners on base or even runners in scoring position, and a guy can't make contact, it's just a feeding type nature that I don't think it's particularly good, especially for those clubs.
Well, it's not productive. I mean, in the game
overall
itself, Tim, it's just not productive. Like a strikeout is, you're zero productive. The only good thing about a strikeout is that you don't hit into a double play in a big inning.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's been a little head scratching for the last 3-4 years, where I don't know if some organizations are making more of an effort to get more of contact type hitters, or guys putting the ball in play, a little more emphasis down in the count with 2 strikes to put the ball in play, especially with runners on base. But you're not seeing it overall. You're seeing some clubs, and I think Cleveland was one of the teams last year where they were putting the ball in play a lot more, and I think it paid off for them to a degree. Yet they're still going to need that power to get them to win some close games.
Hanging out with Tim Wilken, talking scouting and baseball, and appreciate you guys for being part of it. This is the MLB Baseball Scout podcast at Cubs Baseball Channel on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on audio. You may be watching on video, but we appreciate you being here. And I ask if you're on YouTube, man, just like and subscribe to the channel. We got to get 100 on there just to be able to stream this live. And hopefully one day someone's watching for the first time and they're like, oh, these guys have thousands of people. So that's the goal as we move forward and talk about baseball. But one of the reasons that I wanted to do this so badly is because just watching the way that scouting has kind of been just, absolutely rated by the analytics crowd. It's really concerning to me, the future of the game, because of the way that teams have kind of taken a tool and turned it into a philosophy. Turning it into like a be-all, end-all. And Tim, I just don't feel like you can figure everything out by, throwing down, whatever scouting tool that you have to track spin rates and velocity and, and all that stuff. I think you got to watch the way that people play the game. You talked about, making contact with a runner at third. You may ground out and it goes in the box score as an out, and yet, you might have grounded out to bring home the winning run, or maybe you grounded out and you pushed a guy from second to third, or maybe you're a player like Darius Hill, who's with the Cubs, that I like a lot, that just does a ton of things that aren't going to really pop up on any analytic. Hey, He's going to tell somebody in the on-deck circle what pitch the guy's throwing and how to attack it. He's going to take the extra base when it's there. He's going to foul off a lot of pitches and give you a big at-bat. And the fact that these guys are limited on pitches, I mean, you know, you're going to get 100 pitches maybe. And if he goes up there and takes 10 of those away, you know, that's 10% of what he's going to be able to throw in the entire game. There's so many things that he does and great players do that don't necessarily show up in an analytic, and that's kind of where I want to go right now. And I want to ask you about measurements used in baseball, and you know, how accurate are they, how important are they, and can you use those to supplement having someone there that's watched a lot of games and gets what's going on to figure out who to take and who not to? Big question, Tim.
Yeah. Well, I think with there's a fair amount of clubs that have made a push for it, and fortunately or unfortunately, everything is pending on, you know, spin rate, many of these other tools that are used, the Rapsodo, things like that.
Right, and that's what I was going to ask you about, Rapsodo. But let me just cut in right here. When you started getting these tools in scouting, which were the ones that you felt like were very helpful, and when did you feel like, you know what, this is ridiculous? Like we're absolutely going too far because we've gotten to the point where, you know, we've got a softball player that never played baseball before telling us how to, you know, what this person can do. And to me, I would think that I would want scouts that were in the batter's box facing pitching and, you know, and understood the game at that level. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but your opinion.
Well, I don't know. That's really a tough one to answer, and it's a broad statement, but it's very tough to answer. There's a lot of people, yay or nay, and for example, I was watching a Chicago Cubs game the other day, and Trey Turner naturally was on the Phillies, and they were saying that Trey Turner runs 30 feet a second. Well, I think the fastest time during my time of using the stopwatch, the fastest time might have been by a left-handed hitter coming out of the box after an off-speed pitch that let him out of the box perfect, maybe a 3.5. And
is that Billy Hamilton?
Billy Hamilton, we had anywhere. Steve Hinton, who's a scout with the Tigers right now and was with the Cubs, was in Bakersfield when Billy was in the minors, and 3.4 is an average on a steal. 3.3 is above, 3.2 is well above, and 3.1's like the upper class. And Billy Hamilton stole second one night, and between the four scouts, they had 2.98 to 3.02, just to give you an idea of his speed. But on a swing by a hitter, 3.5's probably the best I've ever had, and it was by a left-handed hitter. So I don't think, you know, the measurement to say he goes 30 feet a second doesn't apply, because 30 feet 3 times is 90 feet, which is home to first. So that would be a 3 flat runner. So I don't know where they're picking the stride up at to measure it. And I think it's kind of a misleading, it's not a stat, but it's a barometer possibly that's trying to be created to have a measurement for runners with these strides. But I appreciate, and I know Trey Turner's upper echelon as a runner for speed, but uh, that equates to 3 flat as a runner, and I just you got to be careful making those statements because everyone has more than likely takes a full swing, and then your measurement comes off of contact, and so your times are skewed. Uh, I don't know what they're doing to measure it. It must be after, a tenth of a second or maybe 2/10 of picking up his running stride and then saying he's 30 feet per second. So uh, just that measurement, some of the Rapsodo findings are a little hard uh, to accept for myself, especially when it gets to when you're looking at stats and just pick any pitcher you want to, and you find out that his spin rate is below average, but yet the batting average off that particular pitch is probably well above average. And it, some of these, I mean, it's almost like you need to challenge them and say, okay, how are we coming to these numbers? And it's really tough to gauge.
So what happens when you do that? What happens when you're like, hey, I don't know. We were talking about, like, we love looking at the velocity of the ball off the bat, right? Which, I mean, I think it tells you something. I mean, if someone's, hitting the ball, Ellie De La Cruz, the Reds prospect, hit 3 balls off the bat that were 116 miles an hour plus. He became the first player to do that. And it was, I think, 2 home runs and a double, or maybe it was a couple doubles and a home run, whatever it was. Like, it's pretty impressive. But does that mean if you hit a home run that's like, I don't know, 89 miles an hour off the bat, it doesn't count? What does that tell us?
Well, a home run's a home run. Hank Aaron hit 756 homers, and he had the nickname of Henry and some of the other nicknames he had, but one of the nicknames amongst some of the players in the major league, he was called the fence scraper because a lot of his homers just made it over the fence. And a home run's a home run, and if you're doing it consistently like Hank Aaron, and if he's not ranked in the top 10 in velocity off his home runs, who cares? And just for instance, last year, I think we were talking about this the other day off the air, that Harold Ramirez, who plays for the Tampa Bay Rays, pretty good hitter. And last year he hit the slowest home run in the major leagues, and it was at 85.4 miles an hour. So the guy that hits 108 or 109, they don't count as much, or is
right.
it equal, or
you have to turn those back in.
Oh geez, it kind of irks me. I can remember a few years back there was a shortstop prospect in the system, and they said, well, he only averages 88 miles an hour off the bat. And I said, well, he is 6'4" and 175 pounds, and he's got fairly broad shoulders, I think, and he was 18 at the time. And I said, in 3-4 years, he might, he might put 15 pounds on, and the strength to his swing's going to kick in, and that'll equate. But if you're going to use that stat when they're 18 or 19 years old and not fully developed, I just don't find that to be real fair. and a measuring tool, at that age. And now the guy's in the major leagues, and he's hitting about 280, and he hit a home run the other day, and it was 109 miles an hour. But as an 18, 19-year-old, he was hitting the ball on the average about 88 miles an hour. As long as they're consistent with their contact and their strength to come, I don't find that a meaningful stat at that age. Maybe you can make an argument for it once they're matured and in the major leagues. Go ahead and do it. But I don't find much value below the major league level that gives the velocity off a bat much credence.
So in your world of scouting, when you're talking about the Rapsodos, and I don't know, I've seen people and it's just like spin rate this and velo that, and then you watch the player and you're like, I don't know. I mean, this guy's not very good. But then sometimes you hear people say that and you watch them and they're really good, and you're like, okay, I mean, maybe that kind of quantitates why someone is so good. I feel like it's almost like when you're trying to put together a puzzle, it's part of the puzzle, but it's not the entire puzzle. From your perspective and the experience that you've had in scouting, how do you deal with being around, some of your bosses probably that think that, that they really want to rely very heavily on the statistical stuff and not as much on going out and watching with your own two eyes, which you and I both probably agree that I think that you can't supplement that, but there's people that think you can.
Well, like you said earlier, if there's some kind of balance in there to where it can be weighed on both sides, but the ones that are running a fair amount of those departments, the two eyes aren't looked upon as strong as the measuring of numbers. And I believe in a fair amount of those numbers, but at the same time, there's unseen items as a hitter or a pitcher or whatever that you can't do it with numbers. And maybe more so at the major league level, but when you're starting to try to apply it to amateurs, guys in the lower minor leagues, underdeveloped guys physically, the strength factor is not there. And you were talking about pitching earlier. We've got more and more arm injuries in the last 5 years. And I think that needs to be looked at to some degree. Guys have less of a feel for pitching than they used to. It's all about velocity. And I understand at the end of the game, that's kind of what wins a fair amount of games in the major league level. But learning how to pitch, and especially as a starter, I don't know overall if baseball's doing a good enough job. And I get the part third time through the lineup, but I think it was Scherzer was pitching the other night that they said his third time around the lineup, the batting averages were less than they were the first time through and the second time through. So do you have to be mechanical all the time and say, no, you need to get that starter out of there? And, the pitching coach and the manager have to have some say in that. They can see that. But sometimes they won't do it because they feel a little bit of heat and pressure to get them out of there after the second time through the lineup.
Yeah, look, I was watching a game in the Southern League, and the Smokies were playing the Reds affiliate, and they left their starter in, and he blew a lead late, and I said, you know, on the postgame show, I said, but that's what he's here for. You know, the guy's throwing 99, and he had a really good game, and he gave up 3 runs in the 5th, you know, couldn't get through the 5th, but was there. And I'm like, wouldn't you rather it be here in Double-A than him do that in Cincinnati? And you know, the other thing is, and maybe it doesn't even matter that much, but the Cubs have developed a handful of starters over the last decade, and they're famous for getting starting pitchers out at the minor league level fast. And I just feel like that's not really developing. I mean, it doesn't matter if you win or lose here. It's having the experience of going through the lineup 3 times. Well, then they'll say, well, you know what, maybe you're not going to go through the lineup anymore 3 times in the big leagues. Well, maybe not, but I mean, in the minor leagues, you might as well try to do it because the game may change again. You know, it used to be that you went through the lineup 3 times. And besides that, it's going to make the game better if we ever get back to having starting pitching that really is starting pitching. You know, instead of just having a guy that's trying to get 4 innings in or 5 innings, you know, like how about having a guy that pitches 7? You know, that's when people really love the game. So,
you know, the strive to get more consistency and more production as far as innings are going for a starting pitcher, if all of a sudden you start losing those guys, that kind of trickles over to the scouting department, because all of a sudden you start looking at your system, and maybe a few years prior you had taken a fair amount of everyday players because you thought you had your staff there, and then all of a sudden there's some pressure, and then all of a sudden possibly someone says, God, we got to get some more pitching in here because some of our guys have been going down. And this is a little bit of a byproduct of a lot of these injuries. And you think you have enough, but I don't know if you ever have enough pitching. And,
yeah, look, and I remember Theo saying that. I mean, like, you know, when he was the president of the Cubs, you know, he's like, hey, look, you want to have 5 starters and then maybe 6 or 7 or 8, and you never have enough.
No, you certainly don't.
And you know what? Starting pitching has been at a premium, and I look at the teams that win the World Series, the Houston Astros, the Atlanta Braves. Guess what they have a lot of? Starting pitching. You know, like, yep. So whether people want to believe this or not, and if you can hide your starting pitching with a bullpen, you still got to have starting pitching to win. The last team that I don't feel like had great starting pitching and won the World Series was Kansas City, but they had an amazing bullpen that was, I mean, maybe one of the greatest bullpens ever in 2014. That rarely ever happens.
No, it doesn't. And you got to remember that they've probably got a Hall of Fame catcher potentially in Salvador Perez, who knew how to handle those staffs. And like you said, it's not done much with the relief staff to win a World Series, but certainly they have one of the better ones in baseball, and maybe made up for a deficiency or two because they had a fair amount of them.
Hanging out with Tim Wilken. I'm Mick Gillispie, and we are talking scouting. This is the MLB Baseball Scout podcast, and for those of you that are listening, please go to our YouTube channel, and it's Cubs Baseball channel on YouTube, and subscribe to it. We're trying to get to 100 at this point in time so that we can do the show live, and you guys could, you know, plan your whole day around us talking baseball. But right now, yeah, they do it. This is episode 4 already, and we've had a good time doing it. We would have probably been on episode 8 had I not almost died from an appendectomy on opening day. You know, so that was not a lot of fun, but we're doing it right now, and we're having a good time. All right, Tim, final topic of today's show, Alex Gonzalez, his signing out of high school, and the Blue Jays and the Cubs. This was a guy that well, I say final. Actually, I have something else I want to ask you about that has to do with the Blue Jays. But let's just hear what you got to say about Alex Gonzalez.
Yeah, it was 1991. Alex, we had drafted Alex in the 13th round, and Hall of Fame general manager Pat Gillick always used to like to sign the unsignables, and he had done it in 1989 with John Olerud, who was thought to be going back to Washington State University. He'd done it in 1991 with Sean Green, who was supposed to be going to Stanford but signed out of high school. In that same draft, Alex Gonzalez we took in the 13th round, and a lot of the area guys in Florida thought Alex was going to be unsignable. And Pat always used to like a good wrestling match. He had a notable one with Steve Carsey, or Toronto's first-round pick in 1990. Pat was really involved with that every time Pat got the deal done. But in this particular one, our area guy who had done his homework, and the word on the street was that there's no way Alex Gonzalez is going to sign. His father was a professor at the University of Miami, and that's where Alex's scholarship was out of high school. So Pat and Chris Buckley go in, who's now what the Cincinnati Reds Chris is. And so Pat goes in with him. They had a meeting for about an hour, hour and a half. It went pretty good. And they leave to go out and get in the car and go back to the hotel. And Chris had noticed Pat looked a little glum. And he says, "What's wrong, Pat?" And Pat goes, "I think you're going to sign this guy," almost begrudgingly. And Chris kind of found that funny, but I think Pat liked these drawn-out negotiations that went the length of the summer. So Pat calls me up and he says, "I want you to go in with Chris," because this was Chris's second year as a scout. So we go in and we start talking, and Chris is talking about our minor league clubs and our managers, the towns the minor league clubs were in, the coaching staff. We had meal plans for a lot of these players. He was describing that, and Chris doesn't hear particularly well. And we're sitting at the dinner table. And anyways, so Alex's mom, who's such a gem, what a sweet lady, and she starts asking questions, and Chris really can't hear her, and he keeps going. And she's asking questions about sheets, pillowcases, anything, and Chris keeps going. And finally, I'd had enough, and I didn't say a word, and I take my shoe and
She eats pillowcases?
Well, basically I'll tell you the last part of that story. I kicked Chris in the shin very hard. They can't see it. And so Alex ends up we talked to the father, and we got him signed that night. So when we left the house, Chris goes, "Why did you kick me in the shin?" Because I put a little divot in his shin. He had a little blood from it. and I said, "Well, Alex's mom was trying to tell you she's going to let her son go out and play professional baseball." And when she started asking about, pillowcases, sheets, towels, whatever, she's wanting to know what she has to do to get her son out on the road. So
It was time to get that pen on the paper is what you were telling him.
Yeah, exactly. And, let her keep asking those questions, because there's a good chance he was going to sign, which he did that night. And so it was a pretty interesting evening, and Pat was right. We were going to sign that guy, and we sure did. But it was one where Chris had to take a bullet for the team when I kicked him in the shins during the negotiation. I'm sure that's never happened. But today's world, we don't have those situations anymore. So it's all done through the agent and the front office, and you don't have to have the contract signed right in front of you.
Yeah, no doubt. You don't have to kick anyone under the table if they're in there talking. All right, the final, I told you that was the final thing, but the final thing's actually going to be Roy Halladay. You know, we talk about my buddy Jared Kingery, who played with Halladay with the Smokies in 2001. Halladay played with the Knox Sox in '97 and then the Smokies in 2001. So the team that I cover, he's a big part of their history. And this, you know, with everything that he did, the two-time Cy Young Award winner, Philadelphia and Toronto, and a Baseball Hall of Famer, it was May 29th, 2010 that he threw the 20th perfect game in MLB history. He outdueled Josh Johnson in Miami. And Halladay might be among the 5 greatest pitchers of my lifetime. You were there when the Blue Jays signed this guy. They were coming off a couple World Series and a strike. Mm-hmm. How do you guys go out and sign a future Hall of Famer when you just won the World Series? Because, you know, I look at the drafts that the Cubs had after they won the World Series, and they weren't great.
No, but
you're drafting back, though. That's part of it. I'm not trying to put anybody down, but you know what I'm saying. You're drafting back, maybe development changes. There's a lot of reasons why, and I don't want that to come off like they didn't do a good job drafting. You know, but you just don't have the same pick. And I want to say one more thing before you get started. Russ Nixon told me the Astros had just came in second. They lost the World Series, and I spent 1 year with him, and he was like, think about the draft. Your first pick is after everybody else picked. Your second pick is after everybody else picked. Your third pick is after everybody else picked, right? And I learned something from that. So not a shot at the Cubs. I'm not taking a shot at anybody. I'm just saying it's tougher when you're winning. And the Blue Jays had done that, and then they go get Roy Halladay.
Yeah, we were fortunate as far as I was concerned that we could get him to that pick. It was the 17th pick of 1995, and a lot of good things came out of it. And I remember Roy, that second year, he has a no-hitter. Last homestand of the year, we're playing Detroit, and Bobby Higginson must have thought he was starting that game, but he didn't start. And they brought him up to pinch hit, and he's on deck with 1 out, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs, I'm going to get you, I'm going to get you. And Higginson comes up at the plate with 2 outs, and he hits a home run over the left field fence, and broke up Roy's first no-hitter. But Roy was, as you know, he got another no-hitter in the playoffs. And just real quickly, we were talking about complete games, and it's kind of a thing of the past. And I brought up the numbers a little bit, and these are actual true numbers through last Friday. And you had Marcus Stroman was starting against Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay was starting rookie pitcher named Tajay Bradley, and it was a 1-0 game. Stroman threw a 1-hitter, got a complete game. So it got me thinking, and I used Roy Halladay as the example. The American League and National League up through Friday last week had 1,622 games combined. So that you can take that in half, and it's about 8-11. Of those games, the American League had 8 complete games. The National League had 6. 4 were shutouts in the National League, and 5 in the National League, 4 in the American League. Roy Halladay, for his career, had 416 starts, had 67 complete games and 20 shutouts. And, 20 years prior to Roy, those numbers wouldn't have seemed like a lot. But it shows you how much of an emphasis relief pitching has been here in the last 20 to 30 years. It's always been a topic about relief pitching, but certainly I miss Roy. He used to live real close to here over in Oldsmar, and would see him riding his bike or running. He ran a lot. And just very good man, and just unfortunate with the plane incident. But
what was do you remember what it was like, the scouting of him? And I mean, you would have been part of that, right? Yeah, I know he came from Colorado. He's a first-round pick. He's throwing balls in his basement as a kid, because he had enough room in his basement in Colorado to go 60 feet 6 inches. Do you remember anything about the scout that liked him, or the scouts that liked him, or what that process was like, and were you surprised that he was still there? And when do you realize, hey, we just killed it with this? We just absolutely killed it with this pick?
Well, I think maybe 10 years into his career, you could have said, yeah, we killed it. I tell you, it was one of the most memorable 2 days I had before, one before his start and one the day of his start. So I was in Southern California, staying in Long Beach, and back then, that was 1995, a lot of the hotels did not have the Weather Channel. Well, the weather's kind of transient in Colorado, so I wanted to make sure that I'm not flying into a rain out or just absolutely brutal weather to where you weren't going to see the real Roy Halladay. So I went down to this bar at the Marriott, and they had the satellite dish and stuff. And I said, do you get the Weather Channel on this? And he says, yeah. And I said, could you put it on there? And I give him a $5 tip for doing it. And there's about 20 people in there watching different games, and they started screaming and yelling. And I says, give me 5 more minutes. I just want to see what the weather's going to be like in Denver tomorrow. Well, there's a big H over the state of Colorado. And I said, good, I'm good to go. So I fly, and it was at the brand new airport at Denver, which the old one was downtown, and this one was out east of town. And probably the worst plane flight I ever had, the last 45 minutes. I got a big weather lesson from it. But anyways, there's about 20 to 25 guys who were there to see Roy, and each guy's flight in made mine seem like it was nothing. And one guy, the pilot, had to bring the aircraft up twice from trying to land it because he just couldn't land the plane. So anyways, I found out on the weather thing that H, and if there's a bunch of circles around the H, that doesn't bode well. And there's a lot of winds and stuff involved. I forgot the term. It rolls right off my tongue, but they're called isobars. And the tighter the isobar is, the more wind you're going to have. So anyways, we'll get to the game. And Roy went to Arvada High School there just outside Denver, and it was a rivalry game. And it was probably one of the most fun games I've ever been at. A lot of jawing back and forth. and Roy was dominant from the first to the seventh inning, and it just strength and coordination. The rap on Roy out of high school by some, and that's why I think he got the 17th pick. Some people bought into he had a one-piece arm action, and his breaking ball back then was a knuckle curve, okay? And the scout, ironically, we had a part-time scout in the Denver area named Buzz Campbell. Eddie Bain had Buzz Campbell as a pitching coach in his amateur days and said Buzz was the best pitching coach he had ever had. So Buzz taught Roy this knuckle curve, which not many people can pick up, especially younger. And so Roy threw that knuckle curve, and like I said, I'm going back to the one-piece arm action. You couldn't control a breaking pitch as good as Roy did with a one-piece arm action. It's just physically impossible to do. He had just enough of bend, and just imagine your arm vertical, and that would be kind of close to a one-piece arm action. But Roy had just enough bend, possibly like that, and Roy he had a lot of strength to his game. He's still probably 20 pounds away from what he was going to be as a man in the major leagues, and it was probably one of the best games I ever had. I had a plane flight that night to Portland. It wasn't as terrible going to Portland from Denver, but needless to say, there was a few toddies because I was still nervous about that plane flight into Denver from Long Beach. So that's, and as we found out later on, Roy went to a traditional curveball, and then I think he learned the cutter in the All-Star game from Mr. Rivera of the Yankees. He picked that pitch up pretty good. So Roy had a lot of aptitude on how to do it. I can go back to the Higginson thing when he hit the home run off Roy, breaking up his no-hitter the following year. And Roy was a high three-quarter release guy. And so the next year he goes out and just gets out of the chutes horrifically. I mean, he has the record, I believe, of, I don't know if it's over 50. It's over 50 innings pitched, the highest ERA by a starting pitcher ever, and it was 10 point something. We sent him all the way back to Dunedin. Pitched a little bit there. Then that's when he came to Knoxville.
2001, yeah.
The second time. He pitched there, and Mel Queen met him there. Mel was our player development director and a big aficionado as a pitching coach. And Mel Queen went up to Roy, and it's not a practice, and many pitching coaches would never, ever try it. But all Mel did was take him from the high three-quarter close to overhand slot and altered his release point. And he says, Roy, I want you to move your arm down to a three-quarter slot. And that's all it took. And I asked Mel, I said, I know the practice is more about, lots of pitching coaches would talk about delivery and how does he get to that three-quarter slot. Mel went right, here's where I want you to throw it. And I said, had you ever done that with anyone else? And Mel says, no, I've never done it with anyone else, but I knew Roy would understand what I was getting at. And he implemented it. And like I said, probably about his 10th year, I was saying to myself, we killed it. So he was, I had 175 guys on my list that year, and he was number 2 on my list. And number 1 was a Cuban defector named Ariel Prieto, who got to the big leagues quick with Oakland. and probably put it down for the wrong reason. I probably should have had Roy #1 because I believed that.
Right, but you ended up getting him anyway, and as things started falling in the draft, were you like, hey, we're going to get this guy?
Yeah. In fact, I think Pittsburgh, it used to go by winning percentage American League, National League. And so the one National League club would pick, and the American League would pick. So anyways, we got all the picks down to about 8 or 9, and the quiz question was Pittsburgh Pirates. And we thought they were going to take an outfielder named Reggie Taylor, a high school player from South Carolina, played about 8, 9 years in the big leagues. We thought they might be leaning that way, but they ended up taking a guy named Hermanson from Las Vegas, a high school there. And so that slid down Reggie Taylor to Philadelphia's pick. And I had talked to the scouting director with the Phillies at the time, and he said Reggie Taylor was high on their list. Mm-hmm. If Reggie had got to the Phillies, they were going to take him. If not, they were going to take Roy Halladay. Naturally, they ended up with Roy a few years after that. But when I found out that Hermanson was going to the Pirates and Reggie Taylor was going to go to the Phillies, I started running around the room like a maniac because I was happy, and it was quite the day in 1995 there in June.
Yeah. Well, we've gone overtime with the show, but I'm sure that you had to be pumped up. And it's the last thing. I mean, before we close it up, did these teams tell you? I mean, are they pretty honest about what they're going to do in the draft? I got to tell you, if it was me, I'd probably be. I do a fantasy football draft, and I lie my ass off. I never tell anybody who I'm taking, Tim. I don't even give them a hint of it. Unless I'm going first, I'm going to throw smoke your way.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but generally the clubs are picking behind. So back in those days, they would kind of let you know what the tendencies were going to be from club to club. But there were some clubs that were hush mouth. The Giants were a tough one back then to get anything out of. The Pirates were really close to the vest. But there were other clubs that would give you a courtesy alert and say, here's what we're doing. I don't know if you had any interest in this guy, but we're taking him. So that would kind of help you maybe garner a few more minutes in that draft room to make sure who was left.
Yeah. Well, Tim, you hear the music.
Yes, I did.
That means that we have gone overtime today. Well, it doesn't mean that. It just means the show's over. But 1 hour and 20 minutes, just about, of talking scouting and baseball. Tim, let's do it again. I think we got enough for another show next week. You want to do another one next week?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, that's Tim Wilken. I'm Mick Gillispie. We had a good time talking to you guys about scouting. Make sure that you subscribe at Cubs Baseball Channel to be part of things. And we will talk to you again real soon, people. Episode 4 in the books. Peace out.